Okay, so tell me a little bit about the decision of your parents to move back to the farm.
I think, you know, my father realized that that was his best option. He didn't really have an alternative. He was so sure that he was going to make it big time, with Woolworth Company in New York City. And when it didn't pan out, you know, and in the meantime, having met my mother, he needed a place for a home. And the family house had already been divided into a two-family home with both parts of the house. I'm not going to say very livable, but about equally, usable. And the fact is that it's on a rural road, a paved rural road. It is up a long slope, and from the road there is a horseshoe driveway. The house is white, and my grandmother had a flower garden running all the way down a fence on one side. So it was an acceptable place to take a bride.
So
in my dad's.
On this working farm that took a lot of energy and hours just to maintain the operation, the productive part, the milk, the vegetables from the garden, there was still a flower garden.
My grandmother didn't have those other functions to be concerned about. And my grandfather was committed to making my grandmother happy. So he would put in as many hours as she needed from him for something that had no monetary value whatsoever. And he's a person that my mother always spoke of with almost reverence from his kindness, especially towards a woman that he didn't feel the same, kinds of feelings at the time, when I was born in there, as he had when she was young, and yet he was so committed to her. And my mother instilled in me that kind of appreciation for my grandfather. So there was my grandfather doing good things. And my grandfather, one more grandfather thing. Okay. My grandfather entertained me greatly by what he loved to do with the dog. First of all, a dog is a working part of a farm, okay? The dog's there to bring the cows in. And that was a dog, he was a job. But for my grandfather, this dog was a playmate. And he would sit, pretty much like I am, with his hands in front of that dog, and the dog would be so alert because he knew this man was his friend, always had been, actually his playmate. And so the dog would sit there, and my grandfather would come forward toward the dog and then get his muzzle his muzzle in his hands, go woof, 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 woof. And the dog wouldn't move because he didn't want, to ruin the moment. And There were lots of reasons why I love my grandfather, but watching my grandfather with a creature, you know, that he didn't have to be nice to, but not only was nice to, but made the dog happy, very happy. I loved that. I was lucky. I saw that. I was part of that.
So there were a lot of animals on your farm, but the dog was one that he connected with because it could respond in a way that was recognizable, or what do you think the relationship was there? Obviously, farm animals aren't that same kind of.
No, I mean, a dog. I don't know. I mean, a dog actually cares about things. I mean, I can't say that a cow really cares about things other than when am I going to get fed, you know. Horses, you know, I'm a little more lenient too. But yeah.
So is that common? Is that a common relationship for farmers and their dogs? Did every farmer there have a dog?
Dogs didn't get played with. No, dogs could be trained to go get the cows. Yeah. And our dogs would go all the way through a barnyard down toward a creek to get the cows and bring them up at milking time. So, no, a dog was an employee, basically, not a friend. And so my grandfather just had this whole side relationship with that dog.
So when your mother and father moved back to the farm, what was their life like in a general sense? I guess they were newlyweds at the time. Were they married in New York or married in Adams?
Oh, wow. You know what? I hadn't even thought about that in a long time. I'm sorry, my memory's not good on that right now. It might come back to me.
What's your impression of their relationship?
I think they must, no. I know the answer now. I understand how I can come to it. They were married in New York because my father had to get back to northern New York because the farm was going to be lost to him if he didn't. But my mother was committed. She was a well-respected teacher. I may have already used that phrase on Long Island to rich people. And you don't start the school year and not fill that school year out. You just don't do that. And so she was there for that reason. And so Dad went back first to New York. Went to New York first, rather.
Okay, so he went back there to the farm. And she finished out the school year.
That's right.
And and they were ultimately married in Adams Center, or was her family did she have family in Long Island?
They were married before he went back.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that might have been in Pennsylvania, but no, she had no family on Long Island. It was just a community that looked for the very best teachers and found her, you know, and took her from where she was at school.
What do you think their early relationship was like?
What do I think what?
What do you think their early relationship was like as husband and wife?
Passionate, dedicated. I'm going to say optimistic too. I mean, I think my mother was so receptive to leaving the city life that she probably had never thought of leaving, to be honest, and receptive when she understood that this is really a beautiful farm. It was a big farmhouse. There were two sides to it, two apartments, we will say, and that they were very nice people. And so, you know, without regrets at all, because my dad was so charming and delightful and, you know, good. Of course, you know, I'll do that. I'll live on a farm. Now, she had fears because she had had a friend who also married a farmer. And theirs was a very pitiful situation. It was not the beautiful situation that my family's farm was, her husband's family. So, you know, but when she got there, it was, as he had described it, you know, it was a good place to live.
You mentioned your father's charm. What was his personality like? Was he gregarious? Was he outgoing? Was he...
Very, very gregarious. He loved it when they had he loved for them to have parties. For they had, you know, a couple friends, you know, different friends, and Dad was at the height of his pleasure, I think, when he was with a group and telling stories. You know, and filling people's glasses with alcoholic beverages, and looking at his wife, who was both smart and clever, but also attractive. You know, it's like the good life. That's the way they both saw it. It was a good life. There wasn't even anything missing, and then of course I came along fairly quickly, but there was still something missing, wasn't there? Because there wasn't the son, and then that wasn't missing.
So it didn't feel to them like going back to the farm was a big
punishment.
Sacrifice. Even though it was a great extreme in living style from being in the city to being on a farm, it wasn't was it a step down socially?
No, the thing is that it was very clear that they could never have a living situation as wonderful as that farm was. That was the best they could do. In fact, it was beyond what they had expected. So it was an opportunity, yeah.
Was farm life a good life? I mean, was it lucrative? Was it, I mean, could you make good money?
In my parents' situation, it was a good life, and you could make, I'm not going to call it good money, I'm going to call it a good living. It involved a tremendous amount of money in the form of farm equipment. That was quite an investment, a real heavy investment in that. But some of that had already been done before my dad got there. And the other thing about the equipment is that because my grandfather and his brother had nearby farms, they shared equipment. They only had to have one of this between them. So all of that kind of was in place by the time that my father made the decision to go to live on the farm. Nothing was required of him in far of outlay for that. But it is a big outlay.
Mm-hmm. And so what was your father came back and shortly your mom came to the farm?
She wanted to fill out the school year. She had had an obligation, you know. She had told them, you know, she had no way of knowing that she would be leaving at any time, and so.
What was the dynamic like on the farm now that the relationship between your father and your grandfather in terms of a working relationship or a father-son relationship?
I think it was a role reversal. My grandfather didn't want to be making the decisions, figuring out how to solve problems. So it was a role reversal that my grandfather longed for and that my father was ready to accept. And so I didn't see problems between the two of them. Of course, I was a kid, but I never, I mean, my father could have, had there been problems, he would have said, I can't believe my dad won't X, Y, Z, or I would hear that in the house, believe me. But I don't remember it. If it was at all, it was a big thing. Yeah. I think that was two people deciding, boy, this is the best solution.
Mutually beneficial
Mm-hmm.
for each one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you were born in 39,
Mm-hmm.
and grew up there, went to school there. You went to school, and was there one school in Adams Center for all grades?
That's
What was
right.
your school like?
That's right.
And did your mom teach there at that time, or?
Not when I first, not at first when I started school, but then they became desperate for a third grade teacher. And the principal knew about my mother and her teaching career. And basically what they did was talk her into it. And at the same time, it was clear on the farm boy that extra money, that extra income would be very welcome. So it was, and the nice thing about teaching is you've got summers off. It's not, you haven't given your whole life to it, so.
Did you like school?
Oh, God. I loved it. I mean, it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I mean, because my mother went back to teaching, I had to be somewhere before I was ready for first grade. So I went to school with my mother, and they put me in the kindergarten class. And I got to do all sorts of fun kindergarten-y things. So I can't remember. Of course, there are times when you sure as heck don't want to go to school today because I've got that test. Of course, there are those days. Everybody who's ever in school has them. But I kind of soaked it up, I think, is the best kind of way to say it. I was ready. And I was the only person my age in my home. And look at these. Look at all these people my age. What's not to love? And I had one problem. When I was in kindergarten, I sucked my thumb to go to sleep. Well, kindergarten was not half day in those days. It was all day, and part of the day was a nap. Well, what am I going to do during my nap? I'm going to suck my thumb. So I found myself a little spot behind the piano where nobody could see me. So I had to solve my problem sucking my thumb in kindergarten. Anyway, that's ridiculous. I don't know why I told that.